This year I asked Santa Claus to give me a bag of leftover yarns, and he did. Today in this video tutorial I'm going to show you how I make use of these leftover yarns and make beautiful socks for daily use. For making socks, what I'm going to need is two colors of leftover yarns. I'm going to use two shades in blue, and then my crochet hook. I'm using 3.5 mm or 6 number hook, my favorite pair of scissors, and darning needle. Whenever I'm about to start a new project, I always say that please ensure you have enough yarn for the project. Now, this being leftover yarn project, we have to ensure that whatever yarn we have is enough for the project. Now I have two shades of blue. The darker blue seems little less, so I am going to start my socks with this blue and then add lighter blue to it. Another important thing about leftover yarn is, especially for the socks, we are going to start both the pieces simultaneously. So suppose if this piece of yarn gets over, we can always borrow some from this. And design wise, adding colors will be easy, convenient if you do both the pieces at the same time. Starting with dark blue or dark color, make a magic ring and 15 DC in the magic ring. After 15 DCs are done in the magic ring, slip stitch onto the third chain from the hook or on the head of very first DC. As we are working in rounds, second line is chain 3 and 2 DC on each DC, which means 15 DC will become 30 DC. When in doubt, it's always better to count your DCs. So line number 2 is 2 DC on each DC, that is 15 will become 30. Line number 3 is DC on DC, it means 30 will remain 30. When you are doing DC on DC, it means no increase, no decrease. This is how it will look when folded. Now fourth line and the last line, I need to add only 6 stitches. So what I am going to do is chain 3, DC in the same space, and every fifth stitch I am going to make 2 DCs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and now again in the fifth I will increase. It means 2 DC on 1 DC. Again 4, 1, 2, 3 and 4. Increase. This is going to be the pattern for fourth line. Increase DC on DC4, increase DC on DC4, increase. I'll meet you at the end of this line. After 4 line, I will have 36 DCs and slip stitch into this is how it will look. Now I will make another piece and then continue with the further part of the socks. Before we start further work, it's always better to ensure the start. By now you all must be aware my way of fixing threads is few stitches ahead and then one back loop. This is how I will go round and round so that my starting point or the magic ring is ensured. And then I will cut the yarn and good to go further. I'm done with both the parts. Now it's time to add the next color. The stitch pattern we are going to use is cluster V stitch. So chain 2, one more DC, 2 DC into 1, chain 1, again 2 DC cluster in the same, and we will add the next color. Whenever we want to add the next color, it's always at the closing of the previous cluster. Now skip to 1, 2, next cluster in the two DC cluster, chain 1, 2 DC cluster in the same space, and again I will change the color. Skip to 1, 2, and 2 DC cluster, chain 1, 2 DC cluster in the same space. And at the closing of the cluster, I am taking the last loop with next color. This is how it will be. So one cluster of dark color, one cluster of faint color. This is how it will look. If you see, I am weaving in the end simultaneously so that later on I don't have to work. I'll see you at the end of the row. Now I am on to the last cluster of this line. Change the color, skip to cluster of 2DC, chain 1, another cluster of 2DC. Now here is the trick. I will be completing this cluster with the same color. This is a carry forward yarn which I will hold and slip stitch into the very first cluster holding this yarn. One more slip stitch into the chain 1 space holding this yarn I'm carrying forward, and start with the next cluster. So chain 2, continue with the cluster, chain 1, another cluster of 2DC, and here change the color. See how I moved forward. So here this is my last cluster of the first line. Same color came for the first cluster on the next line. And here again we will continue with the pattern. So now on the faint color cluster you will have dark color cluster, and on the dark color cluster you will have faint color cluster. This is visually very cute looking project. I will show you one more time how I move on to the next line. See you at the end of this line. I am on to last cluster of line number 2. I have changed the color. Now see, I will maintain the pattern. Cluster, chain 1, cluster. Now I am completing the cluster with same color, holding the carry forward yarn and slip stitch into the very first cluster, and one more slip stitch in the chain 1 space, chain 2, and start with the next cluster. Cluster, chain 1, cluster, and here I will use the carry forward yarn and continue. Total we will do 10 lines. Finishing of line and changing color one more time. Last cluster, change the color, doing my last cluster, finishing the cluster with same color, pulling the yarn or weave in yarn, slip stitch onto the very first cluster, again holding the same yarn, slip stitch into the next chain 1 space, start with next cluster, holding the other yarn, and now after this cluster I will use the next color. As I am working with leftover yarns, I am left with really very little dark color yarn. I'll finish this socks till the end of this yarn and do the other socks, and then see how much dark color yarn is left. I'll distribute it equally amongst both the socks, and then we'll decide whether I want to continue with only light color or will I take up another leftover yarn color. I want to make 10 lines, but after 8 lines you see the dark blue color is really very less. Now what I will do is I will do the other socks, use the other dark color yarn and then see how much is remaining. If possible, I can use it for one more line on both the socks and then I will start doing with only faint color or might add some other color to it. I am done with both the socks till 8 lines. The other pair has substantial amount of dark blue color. So what I am going to do is I am going to pull the inside end of this ball and attach it to this one and start doing lines simultaneously so that wherever I have to stop, both the socks will be at same height. 10 lines of pattern are done on both the socks, but I still have this much yarn remaining. I will be using line by line on both the socks so that symmetrically wherever I will stop using that yarn, both socks will be at same length. Now onwards we will do 7 more lines in the pattern, but we are not going to close the line by slip stitch the way we always do it. 7 lines in the pattern but not close the lines will create a kind of opening so that we can wear the socks. We have come till end of line number 11. Now I have closed it with the next color and I am not joining as a slip stitch. So turn your work. Hold this other color and slip stitch into the loop. Start with chain 2 and next half DC or the next cluster. At the end of the cluster, change the color and continue with the pattern. See, this leaves the space open, and this is how we will do our 7 lines. I'll meet you at the other end of the line and again show you how I turn the work. I am on to last cluster of line number 12. I have already changed the color. Cluster 1, chain 1, next cluster, and here I am closing the cluster with other color. I will turn the work. Holding faint color or light color yarn while working and do a slip stitch in the chain 1 space and start with the cluster. So chain 2, another half DC, make a cluster, chain 1, next cluster and close it with the color number 2. See, now this is how opening is shaping up. So this is where I started. 10 lines, I close the loop, Now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines I did not close the loop, so it will act as an opening. And now I will have one line of 4 DCs into chain 1 space. Ideally we have started with color 1, we should end with color 1. How many lines is completely your choice and as per availability of the yarn. We are done with this line. Now turn your work outside in and first pull up the loop from the start. Please remember, this point of the socks will always face more tension because every time we take the socks out or we put in the socks, the pressure will be on this point. So I always recommend doubly ensure the joints. And now I will be doing joining part with line of single crochet. Just match DC to DC and do a line of single crochet. This is how our joint will look from inside and it will look like this from outside. After coming till here, what I am going to do is I will do a line of slip stitch on these single crochets so that my stitches are doubly ensured. I'm done with line of single crochet. Now chain 1, turn your work and slip stitch on all these single crochets so that my stitches are doubly ensured. This is how my stitching will look from outside and this is how my socks will look. Because I have very less dark color yarn, I'll cut the yarn and I'll do border for this portion with the light color. Let me finish with the other socks and then I'll show you how the final product will look. I will do one more line of single crochet around the opening and then weave in the end. And my socks are ready to wear. This is how the final fit looks. You can make as many socks as you want matching to each of your outfit and cover yourself well in this winter. Thank you for watching this video.